The German generals thought it would be over in 8 weeks. 8 weeks to destroy the largest country on earth. 8 weeks to break the Red Army. 8 weeks to end the war. On June 22, 1941, as the sun rose over forests and fields of Eastern Europe, more than 3 million German soldiers crossed the Soviet border. They crossed with confidence, with experience, with the most powerful army the world had ever seen. And yet, standing among them that morning was a truth no one wanted to acknowledge. If this operation failed, Germany would not merely lose a campaign. It would lose everything. Operation Barbarossa was not just an invasion. It was a single decision that sealed the fate of Hitler's empire, whether anyone realized it yet or not. Because from the moment the first shots were fired, the war had already begun turning against Germany. The men at the front did not know this. The officers issuing orders did not know this. Even Hitler himself refused to accept it. But history had already decided. The road to Barbarossa began years earlier, not on a battlefield, but in Hitler's mind. To Hitler, the Soviet Union was not merely an enemy state. It was an idea he believed had to be destroyed. Bolshevism, in his worldview, was a Jewish conspiracy weakening civilization from within. The land of the East was not just territory, it was destiny. Lebensraum, living space. The war in the West had been won faster than anyone expected. Poland crushed. France collapsed in weeks. Britain isolated but still defiant. Germany stood at the peak of its power, and that made Hitler impatient. He believed Britain continued fighting for one reason only, the hope that the Soviet Union or the United States would eventually intervene. Remove that hope, and Britain would fall. The solution seemed obvious to him. Destroy the Soviet Union in a single, decisive campaign. Germany had defeated every enemy it faced so far through speed, shock, and coordination. Blitzkrieg had become a legend. Panzer divisions sliced through defenses. The Luftwaffe ruled the skies. Entire armies surrendered in days. Hitler believed the Red Army would collapse the same way. He believed the Soviet state was rotten, that Stalin's purges had gutted the officer corps, that the population would rise against its own government once German troops arrived. He believed the war would be short. Many German generals privately doubted parts of this optimism, but few dared challenge Hitler directly. Those who did were ignored. In December 1940, Hitler signed Directive Number 21, Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. 3 million soldiers, over 3,000 tanks, more than 7,000 artillery pieces, nearly 2,000 aircraft. The invasion front stretched nearly 1,800 miles. The plan divided the force into 3 massive army groups. Army Group North would drive toward Leningrad. Army Group Center would strike straight toward Moscow. Army Group South would seize Ukraine and its vital resources. The goal was simple and terrifying. Destroy the Red Army west of the Dnieper and Dwina rivers. Capture key cities. End the Soviet Union as a fighting force before winter. Everything depended on speed. Germany did not plan for a long war. It could not afford one. What the planners did not fully understand, or chose to ignore, was scale. Russia was not France. Distances were vast. Roads were poor. Railways used different gauges. Fuel, ammunition, food, everything would have to travel hundreds of miles behind advancing troops. If momentum slowed, the entire operation would be in danger. Still, on the morning of June 22, 1941, none of that mattered. The invasion began with a thunderclap. German artillery opened fire across the border. The Luftwaffe struck Soviet airfields in a devastating surprise attack. Hundreds of Soviet aircraft were destroyed on the ground within hours. Communications collapsed. Soviet units were caught unprepared. Many commanders had received no warning. Some believed the attacks were provocations, not a full invasion. Stalin himself refused to believe reports at first. He suspected a provocation, a trap. He feared reacting would give Hitler an excuse for full war, not realizing that war had already begun. By the time Moscow accepted reality, the front was already collapsing. German armored spearheads drove deep into Soviet territory. Entire Soviet armies were encircled. Tens of thousands of prisoners were captured in days. The numbers were staggering. At Minsk, over 300,000 Soviet troops were taken prisoner. At Smolensk, another massive encirclement followed. The Red Army lost men faster than it could replace them. From Berlin, it looked like total victory. German newspapers proclaimed the Soviet Union finished. Generals spoke openly of marching through Moscow by summer's end. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. The Red Army did not collapse. It bled, and it bled without stopping. Soviet units kept forming, even after catastrophic losses. New divisions appeared from seemingly nowhere. Soldiers fought and died in staggering numbers, buying time with their lives. Villages burned. Roads turned to dust under endless traffic. Supply lines stretched thinner every day. German tanks began running out of fuel. Trucks broke down on primitive roads. Horses died by the tens of thousands pulling artillery. The weather turned hot. Dust choked engines and lungs alike. Most alarming of all, German intelligence estimates began to fail. The Red Army had far more divisions than expected, far more tanks, far more manpower. Each time the Germans believed they had destroyed the last Soviet reserves, new ones appeared. Stalin, once paralyzed by shock, regained control. He ordered a scorched earth retreat. Factories were dismantled and moved east. Crops were burned. Rail lines destroyed. The land itself became a weapon. And then there was the Soviet soldier, poorly equipped, often badly led, sometimes sent into battle with little more than a rifle and orders not to retreat. But they fought, not for ideology, not for Stalin. They fought because retreat meant death anyway. German troops began noticing something unsettling. The enemy did not surrender the way others had. Encircled units fought on until annihilated. Isolated pockets resisted for weeks. Snipers appeared behind the lines. Civilians joined partisan groups almost immediately. The war was changing. By August 1941, the timetable was already slipping. The drive toward Moscow slowed as Hitler diverted forces south to secure Ukraine. The decision created friction among German commanders. Army groups center lost momentum. Critical weeks were wasted. Those weeks would never be recovered. Autumn rains turned roads into rivers of mud. Vehicles sank to their axles. Horses collapsed. Supplies piled up far behind the front. Then came the cold. German troops had not been issued winter uniforms. They were still wearing summer gear. Weapons jammed. Oil froze. Frostbite spread faster than bullets. The Red Army, battered but unbroken, launched counterattacks. Fresh Siberian divisions arrived, hardened, winter-equipped, trained for cold warfare. German troops, exhausted and overextended, were pushed back from Moscow's outskirts. For the first time in the war, the German army was forced into a full retreat. Hitler responded by forbidding withdrawal. Stand fast. No retreat. The order condemned entire units to destruction. Operation Barbarossa had failed. Not officially, not in speeches, not in Hitler's mind. But strategically, the gamble was lost. Germany had not destroyed the Soviet Union. It had awakened it. And from that moment on, the Third Reich was fighting a war it could never win. By the autumn of 1941, the illusion of a clean military victory was gone. What replaced it was something far darker. Operation Barbarossa was never intended to be a conventional war. From the very beginning, it had been conceived as a war of annihilation, not just against an army, but against an entire population. Behind the advancing front lines moved special units, whose purpose had nothing to do with winning battles. They were there to erase people. The Einsatzgruppen followed the German army into Soviet territory almost immediately. These mobile killing squads were tasked with eliminating political commissars, intellectuals, Jews, Roma, and anyone deemed a threat to German racial ideology. At first, the killings were framed as security operations, arrests, questionings, anti-partisan measures. But the pretense vanished quickly. Men, women, and children were rounded up, forced to dig their own graves, shot in groups, buried in mass pits that stretched across forests and ravines from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Places like Babi Yar, where over 30,000 Jews were murdered in 2 days, were not exceptions. They were the pattern. This violence was not a side effect of Barbarossa. It was embedded in its logic. German soldiers were told they were fighting subhumans, that mercy was weakness, that the rules of war no longer applied in the East. The consequences were immediate. Civilians who might have remained neutral joined resistance movements instead. Partisan warfare exploded behind German lines. Supply convoys were ambushed, railways sabotaged, isolated units wiped out. To suppress this resistance, German forces escalated brutality even further, burning villages, executing hostages, starving entire regions. Each act of terror bred more resistance. The invasion had transformed into a war without limits, and Germany was bleeding resources it could not replace. The economic assumptions behind Barbarossa collapsed just as quickly as the military ones. Germany had invaded the Soviet Union, expecting to seize grain, oil, and industrial capacity. Instead, it inherited devastation. The Soviets dismantled entire factories and transported them east beyond the Urals. Thousands of machines were loaded onto trains and rebuilt in remote regions. Production resumed astonishingly fast. German planners had not believed this was possible. They were wrong. Meanwhile, the Wehrmacht was consuming fuel, ammunition, and manpower at catastrophic rates. Vehicles broke down faster than they could be repaired. Horses died in the hundreds of thousands. Supply lines stretched across hostile territory with no secure rear. The deeper the Germans advanced, the weaker they became. And yet, Hitler refused to adjust strategy. He believed willpower could replace logistics. He believed ideology could override mathematics. As winter tightened its grip, German units found themselves freezing, starving, and fighting an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each loss. The Red Army learned quickly. Early disasters gave way to hard lessons. Commanders adapted tactics. Coordination improved. Soviet industry began producing tanks and aircraft in numbers Germany could not match. The T-34 tank, dismissed early in the campaign, proved devastatingly effective. Its armor and mobility outmatched German designs. Its numbers grew every month. Soviet commanders accepted losses the Germans could not psychologically absorb. Entire units were sacrificed to delay advances, blunt offensives, and buy time. Time was the one resource the Soviet Union possessed in abundance. Germany did not. By early 1942, it was clear that Barbarossa had failed in its central objective. The Soviet Union was not destroyed. It was mobilized. Hitler now faced a war on a scale far beyond anything Germany had prepared for. Yet instead of consolidating, he doubled down. A new offensive was planned for the South, toward the Caucasus oil fields. The belief was simple: seize oil and the Soviet war effort would collapse. The result was Stalingrad, an entire German army annihilated in a ruined city bearing Stalin's name. A symbolic catastrophe that shattered the myth of German invincibility. But Stalingrad was only possible because Barbarossa had failed. It had bled Germany white long before the decisive battles arrived. By 1943, the Eastern Front consumed the vast majority of German manpower and resources. Over 3/4 of all German military deaths would occur there. Every tank destroyed in Russia was one not available elsewhere. Every aircraft lost reduced air superiority across Europe. Every soldier frozen, wounded, or killed weakened Germany's ability to fight a global war. Operation Barbarossa had turned Germany into a state permanently on the defensive. It had also revealed the fatal flaw at the heart of Hitler's strategy. He believed wars were won by ideology and boldness alone. But modern war was won by production, logistics, and endurance. The Soviet Union, brutalized beyond imagination, proved capable of all three. Germany did not. The invasion also hardened Allied resolve. The sheer scale of Nazi atrocities in the East destroyed any lingering hope of negotiated peace. The war became total. By the time American industry fully entered the conflict, Germany was already locked into a struggle it could not escape. Barbarossa did not just dismantle Hitler's empire militarily. It dismantled it structurally. The Wehrmacht lost its veteran corps. Officer casualties soared. Replacement units lacked training and cohesion. Command decisions became increasingly centralized around Hitler, whose interference grew more destructive by the year. Every defeat reinforced his paranoia. Every retreat became treason. Reality itself became negotiable. Meanwhile, Soviet confidence grew. The Red Army that staggered in 1941 became a force capable of massive, coordinated offensives. By 1944, it was advancing relentlessly westward, crushing German formations that no longer had the strength to resist. The cities Barbarossa had sought to capture, Kiev, Minsk, Smolensk, were retaken at unimaginable cost. Germany's empire in the east disintegrated piece by piece. What began as an invasion meant to end the war quickly had ensured it would end catastrophically. And yet, perhaps the most devastating outcome of Barbarossa was psychological. It shattered the myth of German superiority. Once that myth broke, everything else followed. Allied commanders learned that Germany could be beaten, that its armies could be exhausted, that its leaders could make fatal mistakes. Operation Barbarossa was that mistake. It was the moment Hitler gambled everything on a single throw of the dice and lost. By the time the German High Command fully understood what Operation Barbarossa had become, there was no way to undo it. The invasion had crossed a threshold from which retreat was impossible, not militarily, not politically, not psychologically. Germany had awakened a force it could neither intimidate nor exhaust. The Soviet Union did not merely survive Barbarossa. It adapted to it. Every catastrophe forced change. Every loss hardened resolve. The Red Army became an institution built around endurance, sacrifice, and scale. Where Germany relied on speed and precision, the Soviet war machine learned to absorb punishment and respond with overwhelming force. Factories east of the Urals ran day and night. Entire cities existed solely to produce tanks, aircraft, and artillery. Civilian suffering was immense, but production never stopped. The German economy could not compete. Germany had planned Barbarossa as a short war precisely because it knew it lacked the resources for a prolonged one. Fuel shortages worsened. Replacement troops arrived younger and less trained. Equipment shortages became routine. Each year after 1941, the balance tilted further away from Germany. The strategic consequences were irreversible. From that point forward, Germany was locked into a two-front war it could not win. The Eastern Front consumed the majority of its forces, leaving the West increasingly vulnerable. When Allied landings came in North Africa, Italy, and eventually Normandy, Germany lacked the strength to respond decisively. Barbarossa had drained the core of the Wehrmacht and had destroyed Germany's freedom of action. Hitler's leadership style worsened the damage. As defeats mounted, he centralized control even further. Generals were forbidden to retreat. Entire armies were sacrificed to maintain symbolic positions. The war became one of attrition, the very type of war Germany was least equipped to fight. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union gained confidence not just in survival, but in victory. By 1943, the Red Army was launching massive, coordinated offensives. Operations like Kursk shattered Germany's remaining offensive capacity. The Soviets absorbed the blow, counterattacked, and never relinquished the initiative again. Barbarossa's promise of quick victory had become a long, grinding destruction. The human cost was almost incomprehensible. Tens of millions would die before the war ended. Entire regions were depopulated, cities erased, generations scarred. And yet, the direction of history no longer wavered. Germany could still fight, but it could not recover. Every mile the Red Army advanced westward carried with it the accumulated momentum of Barbarossa's failure. The invasion had handed the Soviets the moral clarity and industrial urgency needed to outlast Germany. Even Germany's allies recognized the shift. Italy collapsed. Romania switched sides. Finland sought exit. Hungary faltered. The empire Hitler had built through intimidation and speed disintegrated under pressure it could not escape. By the time Soviet troops reached Berlin in 1945, the outcome was no longer in doubt. What remained was reckoning. Operation Barbarossa had done more than doom Germany militarily. It had ensured the nature of the war's end. The brutality unleashed in the East erased any possibility of mercy. The crimes committed ensured total defeat will be total in every sense. Germany would not be negotiated with. It would be dismantled. Hitler did not live to see the full consequences of his decision. He died in a bunker, isolated from reality, still convinced that betrayal, not strategy, had undone him. But history remembers differently. Barbarossa was not undone by betrayal. It was undone by arrogance, by the belief that ideology could defeat geography, that willpower could replace logistics, that hatred could substitute for planning. It was the moment Hitler mistook momentum for inevitability and paid the price. In retrospect, Operation Barbarossa stands as the single most consequential military decision of the 20th century. Without it, the war might have dragged on differently. Outcomes might have shifted. Timelines might have changed. But with it, Germany's fate was sealed. The invasion guaranteed that Nazi Germany would face an enemy capable of destroying it completely. And that enemy would not stop. Barbarossa dismantled Hitler's empire not in one battle, but in 1,000 slow collapses, each rooted in the same fatal miscalculation. The invasion that was meant to end the war ensured it would be fought to absolute destruction. That is why Barbarossa still matters. Not because it was the largest invasion in history, but because it proved that even the most powerful empire can destroy itself. It believes too strongly in its own myth. History did not defeat Hitler. He defeated himself. The moment his armies crossed the Soviet border, the end had already begun, and the world that emerged afterward would never be the same. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more content like this, and share it with someone who might enjoy it.